Hey guys, tonight we climb a mountain. No really, we're headed for Mount Olympus itself. And you're already regretting your choice of sandals. Around you the sky is just starting to glow, and the path winds steeply up through rocks. Wild thyme and a few sleepy goats, who seem better equipped for this than you are. A soft wind smells faintly of pine, and something divine, though it might just be your imagination. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Always fun to see who's falling asleep at noon. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge higher, your feet scuffing against stones polished by centuries of pilgrim souls. Your breath comes slower as the air thins and cools every now and then. You swear you catch the glint of something golden higher up the trail, like sunlight caught on armor, or more likely the sun itself, just mocking you. You already suspect you won't survive this climb, not with dignity intact anyway. History books claim that ancient Greeks actually did climb toward shrines near Olympus, even though the summit itself was considered sacred, and out of reach. Pilgrims would leave offerings on lower slopes, especially at the sanctuary of Zeus, and call it a day. Smart. But here you are with your stubborn, mortal legs determined to keep going. A faint hum begins to float down toward you, like someone playing a harp out of tune. The stones seem to vibrate faintly underfoot, and the goats glance at you knowingly, as if to say, told you so. You pass a little cairn of rocks, each one etched with strange markings, prayers or graffiti. Nobody can agree if these were serious invocations to the gods, or just bored shepherds passing time. Historians still argue whether such cairns marked safe paths or dangerous ones. Either way, you feel a little better adding a pebble of your own. Before moving on higher you climb, the more the plants thin out. The thyme gives way to hardy grasses, and the goats finally stop. Following their absence somehow makes it quieter. Just you, the faint humming above, and the relentless crunch of gravel beneath your sandals. At one point you nearly trip over a tortoise crossing the path. It regards you with ancient, unimpressed eyes before disappearing into a crack in the rocks. Take note of that little guy. He'll come up again later in a way you definitely won't expect. Now the sun has fully risen, painting the sky in warm streaks of gold and pink, and you feel oddly like you're walking straight into a painting. The humming grows louder, more confident now, and you begin to catch snippets of melody, lazy rising scales, and then little clusters of notes that fall apart like spilled bedside. You finally round a corner and stop dead there, bathed in a pool of molten sunlight at the edge of a cliff. Is Apollo himself, sprawled on a smooth rock, legs stretched, one hand shading his eyes from the light that somehow he is also producing. His skin glows faintly, like someone forgot to turn down the brightness, and he's very clearly the source of that odd tentative music. Doesn't seem to notice you yet, which is just as well. Gives you a chance to catch your breath and try to look like you totally belong here. After all, this is Olympus, just another Tuesday. Wind picks up for a moment and carries the scent of something sweet and resinous down the path. You swear you see faint sparks dancing in the air, but they vanish when you blink. For below, the valley still sleeps in mist, the village roofs barely visible, and up here there's only the god, the rocks, and you. You wouldn't expect a newborn to be a criminal mastermind, but then again, you wouldn't expect him to build a musical instrument out of a turtle either. Down in a quiet cave, tucked into the rocky folds of Mount Cyllene, you stir, not as Apollo this time, but as Hermes. Yes, that Hermes, the messenger god, the trickster, the one who basically turned being annoying into a divine portfolio. Are barely a few hours old, still swaddled in mystery and potential, but you're already plotting, because napping is for mortals, and you have ambition. Your mother Maya is fast asleep. She has just given birth to you, so she's earned it. But you wiggle free from your blanket with the speed of a greased olive and toddle out into the wild. Your first breath of the world smells like pine resin, goat sweat, and inevitability. Elastos. Immediately you find a turtle. Not just any turtle, a solid, unimpressed looking creature who probably expected a nap, not destiny. You study it, you poke it then, because you are Hermes, you hollow out its shell, string it with sheep gut, and invent the lyre. No formal training, no permission, just vibes and divine instinct. And boom, a brand new sound exists in the world. Sweet, reedy, sleepy little plucks that echo across the mountain. Like a lullaby from the future, you play a few notes just to test, and even the goats blink slowly, as if they've just discovered jazz. But music is only phase 1, you've barely set the lyre down, before phase 2 kicks in. You want to mess with someone big time, and who better than your smug older brother Apollo? He just got his shiny new cattle. He's very proud, it's adorable realiso. You sneak down into the pastures under the cover of night. The cows are there chewing, dreaming of grass, completely unaware that a baby in swaddling cloth is about to steal them. You know you can't just walk away with a dozen sacred cows without consequences, so you invent footprints that go the wrong way. You tie branches to your feet to confuse any divine tracker. You walk the cows backward. Yes, you, a newborn, have just invented the criminal misdirection trope. You lead the herd across the hills and into a hidden grove, where you tuck them in as best you can, give them a motivational speech or two, then strum your lyre again as if this whole thing were just part of your bedtime routine. Historians still argue whether this myth reflects ancient ideas about trade, deceit, or just good sibling pranks. Some say it was a way to explain how nomadic herders outwitted settled ones. Others just nod and say sounds like Hermes be dawn. You're back in your cave, cause hidden lyre gleaming, looking like an innocent bundle of divine joy. Apollo, of course, has no idea what's coming, but you do, and you are already composing a smug little tune to commemorate your own genius. You wake up to the sound of absolute silence. That's the first red flag, because cows are not exactly quiet creatures. Even sacred divine ones, they move, they shift their weight dramatically. They do that snorty thing cows do when they think the grass is conspiring against them. But today, nothing. You, Apollo, step out into the pasture expecting morning light glinting off sleek bovine backs. Instead, you find hoof prints that go nowhere, grass that looks suspiciously undisturbed, and air that smells like you are about to have a very bad day. You squint, rub your temples, try not to scream, because again, Olympus doesn't do public meltdowns, especially not over livestock. You pace, try to track them, but the prints are wrong. It's as if the cows just moonwalked into the trees and disappeared. You bend down, examine a branch, it snapped in a way that suggests someone small and chaotic invented sandals out of Barno. You're suspicious, not of any of the major gods, they'd be too proud to steal cows, too dramatic, too busy throwing lightning or polishing their gripes. No, this feels like Hermes, but he's a baby, a newborn, and you're supposed to be the rational one, the cultured god, the one who teaches mortals how to sing about sadness without crying. Still, you march up to Mount Selene, storm through mist and myth, and arrive at a cave that is far too quiet for comfort. Inside, there's Maya looking vaguely annoyed, and Hermes snug in his cradle, sucking onto fingers, feet still dusty. You try to explain calmly at first that you know he stole your cows, that there are reversed hoof prints and weird sandal marks and the scent of divine nonsense all over the hills. Hermes just coos, then yawns, then starts singing softly to himself, and the song, that's the strange part. The melody is new, unfamiliar, haunting in that way a tune is when you realize no one has ever played it before. You blink, listen, the baby is holding something, a shell strings, and suddenly your divine brain connects the dots. Lyre invented an instrument in the time it took you to file a complaint to Zeus. Historians still argue whether this moment represents an allegory for the birth of music or a satire of divine bureaucracy, but either way, there's now a magical baby who sings his way out of criminal charges. I scoop him up, march back to Olympus. Cows still missing, pride deeply wounded, and you present your case to Zeus. Who, of course, laughs, because to him this is peak entertainment. Your cows, your dignity, all in the hands of an infant who moonlights as a con artist and part-time Bardzius tells you to sort it out like brothers, because nothing says healthy sibling bonding like divine cattle theft and public trial. Show scowl. Hermes burps somewhere. A cow moo sings in E flat, and this, you realize, is only the beginning. You're Apollo, and you've just been told to resolve a divine cattle heist with a literal baby, so now you stand in the great hall of Olympus cradling your indignation like a broken lyre Zeus has washed. His hands of it Hera is pretending to read. A scroll Artemis is nowhere to be found because even your own twin knows. This is going to be embarrassing. You look at Hermes, still swaddled, still smug. He smiles at you, like he's already written a song about how this ends. Spoiler, he has you take a breath. Try diplomacy, try reasoning. You say, give back. The coach responds, what cows? I say the ones that are sacred and moo and belong to Mess. Says, never heard of them. At this point you realize that a courtroom argument with an infant demigod is not your strong suit, so you try a different angle. You ask about the thing in his hands. The odd shell, the strings, the instrument that hums with something that almost feels like magic. He strums it just once and suddenly the room stops. It's not just a sound, it's a mood, a wave, something ancient and brand new at the same time. The notes float, they shimmer, they wrap around your brain and whisper, forget the cows. You try to stay angry, you do, you even rehearse your indignation silently while the melody curls around your sandals. But then Hermes sings and it's over. Not just the argument, the mood, the memory of why you were mad in the first place. It all melts like sunlight on bronze. You blink, look down, and realize you're smiling despite your sophistorians still debate whether this scene was symbolic of diplomacy triumphing over vengeance or just proof that music can be used as emotional blackmail. Your way, you are enchanted. Hermes sees it, smirks, offers you the lyre, says, take this. It's yours now. You don't know what surprises you more, the gift or the fact that he had the gall to act like this was always part of the plan. You take it, hold it, pluck a note, and yes, you get it now. The cows oddly no longer matter, at least not in the way they did in our aga, because this instrument, this sleepy soft thing made from turtle and nerve and starlight, this is what immortality feels like somewhere. You know the cows are fine, probably maybe being serenaded by nymphs or chewing in rhythm to an invisible lullaby. You decide to let it go. Have gained something else, something better, a new sound, a way to quiet mortals, a way to quiet even yourself. The lyre settles into your hands like it belongs there, and from that moment forward it does. You try to move on, you really do. You have a shiny new lyre, a suspicious sense of peace, and a very smug little brother who somehow convinced the king of gods that theft is cute if done musically. But the cows, they still aren't back. You haven't forgotten them, and even though you'd never admit it, you kind of miss them. So you decide, fine, you'll herd them yourself. You're Apollo, after all, god of order, harmony, sunlight. How hard can it be? You head down to the meadow where Hermes stashed them, and yes, there they are, chewing, blinking slowly, utterly unimpressed. You clap your hands, nothing. You try whistling, gone of them lies down. You try the lyre, just a little melody, and weirdly they listen, kind off, but mostly they just continue chewing with the same deliberate slowness of an old philosopher who's decided to outlast everyone else by sheer grazing. So you pick up a stick, gently prod them in what you hope is the right direction. They ignore you. You push a little harder, they moo in a tone that somehow sounds judgmental. One of them steps on your sandal, another sneezy shoes start to sweat. Not from the sun, you are the sun, but from the creeping realization that cows are chaos in slow motion. You thought being god of the sun would mean natural leadership, that beasts would obey, that nature would listen, but cows, they don't care who you are. They are slow, stubborn, and gloriously indifferent to divine hierarchy. You are Apollo wrestling with animals that refuse to be wrestled. Historians still argue whether this part of the myth was added later as comic relief or perhaps as a warning that no matter how powerful you are, you will never control something with a stomach and for legs that eats for fun. Hours pass, the cows move a few feet. You sing to them, talk to them, offer them divine snacks, and of them licks your tunic and then walks away. This is not victory, but it's something. Be sundown, you've managed to guide them into a loose cluster near a tree that may or may not be sacred. You sit breathing hard, covered in grass, dignity in tatters, and for the first time you begin to understand why Hermes gave you the lyre, because herding cows is exhausting, and playing music that might actually soothe your divine nerve. So you strum A few soft notes just for yourself and the cows. They do something strange. They listen for real this time. Their ears twitch, their eyes half close. And you realize music might not control them, but it calms the man. That for tonight is enough. You return to Olympus covered in dust and philosophical defeat. There's hay in your hair, cow breath on your sandals, and a growing suspicion that you've misunderstood the entire purpose of godhood. You tried to herd them, you really did, and in the process you learned more about patience, humility, and bovine side-eye than any oracle ever taught you. Hermes greets you at the threshold, grinning like he just invented mischief again. Asks, so, how'd it go? You give him a look that could curdle Ambrose a bit. He's already halfway out of the room, plucking at his backup lyre, probably composing an epic about your extremely unheroic afternoon with Livestock. You slump into a marble chair, the kind that's supposed to support divine posturing, but mostly just makes you feel small and slightly itchy as you rest. Something unexpected happens. The cows start following you all at once, and not like a perfect parrot, but slowly, steadily, with the kind of hesitant loyalty usually reserved for confused tourists or curious cats. It turns out they like your music, or maybe they're just trying to figure you out. Either way, they graze near your temple now and moo when you stop playing. You've become in an accidental sort of way their cow sitter, and not just any sitter, the kind who writes lullabies to keep them calm, tunes inspired by slow hoofbeats, melodies shaped by chewing rhythms, and tail flicks. Historians still discuss whether this period of Apollo's life represents a metaphor for domestication or divine humility. Some argue it's a comment on balance, the sun god learning stillness, the sharpest mind dulled into softness by the gaze of a sleepy cow. And while you're discovering things, I learn that cows have preferences. Some like higher notes, some respond to certain chords. One has a suspicious attachment to the Dorian motto. You experiment, you document. You basically become the ancient Greek version of a cow-based music therapist. It's not glamorous, no one's erecting statues about it, but secretly it feels good. You are finally using your talents not for war or prophecy, but for something deeply mundane and weirdly rewarding. The cows, they begin to trust you. They gather when you sit, nap when you hum. You stop trying to make them do anything, and instead you just exist with them. This, you realize, might be the closest thing Olympus has to peace. Even Hermes seems impressed. Starts visiting more often, sometimes to tease, sometimes to steal figs, but sometimes just to listen. And once he even plays with Youtwell lyres, one melody, a duet built on mischief and mooing. It's strange, unscripted, but kind of beautiful, like a lullaby composed by two gods and a dozen extremely bored cows. You're beginning to think this might actually be your new life. Sunlight in the morning, cause waiting just beyond the olive grove, a lyre resting against your knee, and a sense of calm that you definitely didn't have back when you were threatening mortals with plagues and bad poetry contests. You never thought divine peace would smell like damp hay and warm fur, but here you are. And then one day the cows stop listening it all at once. It begins with one of the older ones. She wanders off mid ballad, sniffs a rock, and refuses to come back. You try your usual chord progression, nothing. Another follows, then two more. Suddenly you're playing to an empty pasture, and it feels like losing your audience during a temple dedication. You don't panic yet, but you do call for Hermes. Shows up eating something sticky and laughing before you've even said a word. He says, yeah, cows get bored. You stare at him, bored. Thayer Sacred shrugs. Even sacred things need variety, and that's when it hits you. Your music, your divine radiant musical genius, needs help. So together you try something new. You bring in instruments, drums made of stretched hide, flutes carved from reeds, shells that whistle when the wind passes just right. You create what might be the first experimental barnyard ensemble in mythic history. Historians still wonder whether this is a metaphor for artistic evolution, or just a sign that even gods can be desperate to keep their audience. Seth, cows oddly respond. They perk up, especially when Hermes adds in some goat bells and one very off-key pan flute. You're not sure it's good, but it's different, and sometimes that's enough. Soon you're composing full pieces based on cow mood. Slow chores, lament, no moo before sunrise, And the strangely popular midday number grass is always greener in E-flat Apollo. You are reinventing what it means to be divinate through wrath or prophecy, but through the patient observation of ears twitching to rhythm. Herm starts calling it cow. Yes, you hate it, but the name sticks, and suddenly gods start showing up, not for prophecy, not for light, but for the vibe. Dionysus lounges under a fig tree. Artemis pretends not to enjoy it. Even Athena admits the rhythmic pacing has strategic valutes. Not Olympus as usual, it's betterless thunder. More harmony. You play Hermes improvises cow's nape, and somehow it all makes sense. You never thought your divine legacy would include the phrase cow sitter in Chiefiat. Here you are, Apollo, god of light and reason, currently negotiating with a particularly moody calf who refuses to leave the shade of a fig tree. It's been days, maybe weeks. Time is weird when measured in cud-chewing sessions and half-remembered melodies. Your music has evolved, less performance, more conversation. You pluck the lyre the way a shepherd whispers, soft and patient, half lullaby, half apology, and it works sometimes, but other times the cows are restless. Their ears twitch at nothing. Their hooves scuff the earth like they're remembering older music, something wild and unsupervised. That's when the nymphs show up. You hear them before you see them, laughter on the wind, feet padding over moss, and suddenly the whole grove smells like crushed herbs and chaos. They come dancing, spinning between trees, hair tangled with ivy, voices like flutes left in the rain. They greet you casually as if you've always been here, as if they haven't heard of Olympus or sacred cows, or your solar resumion of them. Tall and barefoot sits beside you and says you're playing too tight. You blink. Teich nods. Music's supposed to wander, and then without waiting she plucks your lyre off rhythm, off key, but it works. The cows lift their head. Sherms arrives just in time to see one of them attempting to sway. He grins. This is my fault, isn't it? You sigh. Probably so. Now it's you, Hermes, and a semi-feral musical collective of nymphs. Together you start experimenting. You let go of structure. You play what the grove wants. Sometimes that's a simple hum, other times it's chaotic drumming with sticks and horns, and the occasional slapped chord. Historians still argue whether this was the real birth of Greek folk music or just divine improvisation with an audience of grass-obsessed mammals. Either way, it becomes a routine. Mornings with the cows, afternoons with the nymphs, evenings trying to remember what it felt like to be taken seriously, but secretly you're happy because there's a rhythm now, one you didn't expect, one that feels less like control and more like coexistence. You don't lead the herd, you travel with it. You don't tame the grove, you tune into it. You are not just playing music, you are listening. Word spreads like olive oil on marble, not about your glory, not about battles or sun chariots, or the time you out-oracled an entire temple of priests. No, what spreads is the music. Whispers float from shepherd to traveler, from nymph to satyr, from bored centaur to equally bored amphora painter. Fears a sound in the hills, they say, a kind of dream that floats on air, plucked from a shell and sung by the god who used to be loudened. So they commend pilgrims, exactly, more like wanderers, philosophers, sleepy teenagers, occasionally someone who thought you were still doing prophecies and is now too polite to leave it. They sit, they listen, they sometimes bring snacks, and you, Apollo, sit beneath your favorite olive tree, lyre in hand, Hermes at your side with a pipe made from some poor bird's femur, and you play. It's not a concert, no one claps, there's no applause in the grove, only nods, yawns, the slow shifting of feet in soft soil, but something's happening. The music, it spreads in day. Athena shows up, not to lecture, not to scowl, but to listen. She doesn't say much, just sits, arms crossed, eyes closeted. You finish a tune about wind and hay and the kind of sleep that only cows seem to get. Opens one eye and says that chord was clever. You almost fall off your rock. Then comes Dionysus, dragging vines, bringing grapes, laughing too loud but humming in harmony. And Artemis reluctantly wanders and stays near the edge, but doesn't leave it. Grove becomes something else, not a stage, not a temple, but a kind of breathing place for gods, for beasts, for anyone willing to sit still long enough to hear the breeze echo back a melody. Historians still argue whether this period marks the beginning of communal Greek music or if it was just one long magical jam session. Either way, it starts to matter. Mortals begin copying it. They carve instruments, they mimic your songs, They create lullabies not for gods, but for babies, for sailors, for old men who forget their own names at dusk, and none of it bothers you because it was never about ownership, it was about sharing. Given the cows, now decorated in flower garlands by over-enthusiastic satyrs, seem to understand the chew in time. They sleep into newer, still Apollo, still divine, still radiant, but now you're something else to your background music, and somehow that feels just right. You and Hermes are parenting not mortals, not demigods, not even animals. That could be considered spiritually cooperative, and you're co-parenting cows, and somehow that phrase feels both ridiculous and entirely accurate because you're not just watching them anymore, you're arranging their lives. You discuss grazing schedules. You argue about salt lick placement. You disagree on which ones are clearly slacking. In the cud-chewing department, Hermes thinks they need more freedom. You think they need more structure. Hermes calls it instinct. You call it laziness wrapped in four. You build a fence. He turns it into a racetrack. You teach them to respond to different melodies. He teaches them to tap their hooves in rhythm to confuse passers-by. It's not efficient, it's not dignified, but it is strangely fun. You sit together, usually under the same tree, tuning your lyres and watching the herd with the wary affection of two gods who never asked for this. Hermes hums while crafting a cow-sized laurel crown. You strum a lullaby titled Ballad of the Unmoved Heifer. The cows ignore both. Still, you learn things. I learned that the smallest calf has a temper, that the oldest cow responds only to minor chords, that there's one who pretends to sleep just to skip her turn at walking. You also learn things about Hermes, that he has 3 secret tunes for stealing pies from unattended picnic baskets, that he once convinced a river spirit to adopt a goat, that he's actually kind of good at sitting still when he thinks no one's watching. Historians still try to determine if this co-parenting dynamic was symbolic of order and chaos finding balance, or just a divine buddy comedy that spiraled out of hand. But for you it becomes a rhythm. You and Hermes, bickering and bonding, playing and planning, never quite agreeing, but never really parting. Either at some point you realize you haven't left the grove in weeks. You were supposed to be busy writing prophecies, inspiring poets, smiting occasionally, but here you are tuning strings and measuring oat levels, and you don't hate it. It feels surreal, simple, safe, even if Hermes does keep renaming the cows after obscure star constellations. You stop correcting him eventually because in a way they are stars. Now little moving lights in your orbit, steady, grounded, always chewing, and honestly, that might be better than prophecy anyway. It starts with a jock. Hermes says we should put on a show. You laugh, assume he's kidding, but then he starts inviting people, nymphs, shepherds, a satyr with one functioning flute, and a goat who dances when nervous. You tried to stop him, remind him this was supposed to be peaceful, private, low moo, but he's already carved the word concert into a flat rock and placed it at the entrance to the Grovian, so you find yourself involved in what will go down as the first divine concert for an audience that includes actual goats. There's no program, no theme, no seating, just a patch of grass, a bunch of semi-committed musicians, and a crowd that doesn't entirely understand what's happening, but seems to relax. To leave you open with something simple, a few notes, soft, measured, a melody designed to lower expectations, and Heartradish Hermes follows naturally with a chaotic medley involving cowbells and a shell full of pebbles. Nymphs add harmonies, some intentional, some accidental. Only of the cows wanders into the middle of the grove and falls asleep standing up. The crowd, mostly mortal, melts into the grass, heads resting on cloaks, eyes drooping, and you realize this is working not just as entertainment, but as something more, a kind of shared breath, a collective exhale. You and Hermes play softer, slower, until even the satyr stops tapping his foot and simply listens. Historians still argue whether this moment was the origin of Greek pastoral music or an accidental sleep ritual disguised as a jam session, but everyone agrees on one thing: people left that grove rested. No one clapped, no one shouted. They simply blinked, slowly stood up quietly, and wandered off like dreamers, easing out of something important to you. And Hermes don't say much after. You just sit plucking strings, listening to the cows snore gently under the star sand. Though you won't admit it aloud, you're already planning the next concert. You Even consider naming it snooze sonata. Hermes vetoes it immediately. You didn't expect the philosophers at first. It's just one beer down to his chest, sandals worn thin, eyes full of that peculiar glow that says, I've thought about this too much. He sits near your favorite cow, the one with the freckled nose and the suspicious gaze, and just listens. You assume he's here for the music, the gentle vibe, the nymph-made hummus, but then he approaches you after a particularly dreamy set and says, have you noticed that the cows chew in mathematically rhythmic intervalsia? Blink politely, say no. He beams, says it's divine proportion, that the hooves move in patterns of 4, that the size align with the golden radii. Thank him kindly and back away slowly, but he returns the next day with scrolls, and soon more of them arrive. Thinkers, talkers, people who measure sound with diagrams and cow movement with string. They come not for the music, but for the theory. They want to define it, pin it down. They ask questions like, do cows moo in harmonic minor? And is Hermes technically playing in Mixolydian or just guessing? Hermes is delighted, makes things up, cites imaginary composers, claims one of the cows invented syncopation during a sneeze. You tried to stay out of it, but they rope you in. They name your sleepiest lullaby the Apollonian drift. They ask for copies, transcriptions, lessons, and suddenly you're teaching it formally. Just when the lyre is already in your hands and the sun is leaning low, and someone happens to ask how you made that chord weep like a homesick shepherd. You show them, you explain sort of with gestures and sounds, because really, it's not about formulas, it's about noticing how the light shifts on olive leaves, how cows breathe in groups, how silence has texture if you sit long. And if historians still debate whether Pythagoras visited the grove, some say yes, that he stood beside you, counted your notes, measured the pauses between moo and melody. Others say he heard about it secondhand and built an entire worldview around the imagined music of cows. I don't mind either way, because the grove stays gentle, the music stays sleepy, and even the philosophers eventually close their eyes. You play the dream, and the world for a while stops trying to define itself. By now your little grove has acquired a reputation, not as a temple, not as a theater, but as something gentler, something quieter, a place where even the gods come to lose track of time. And of course, with reputation come scholars. They arrive in sandals and speculation, scrolls tucked under their arms, questions packed like figs in wax paper. They want answers. What was this myth really about? Was Hermes the symbol of innovation? Were the cows representative of lost property rights in agrarian societies? Did the lyre reflect the emergence of trade, or was the whole thing just ancient Greek sibling rivalry? With ambient muses, Apollo tried to be helpful, but the truth is you were there, and it still doesn't make sense. You remember the hoof prints pointing the wrong way, the lyre made from a turtle shell, the way Hermes smiled like he knew the future and was already bored of it. You remember feeling foolish, angry, then calm, then musical. It wasn't a metaphor at the time, it was just your life, strange and soft and echoing in ways that made sense only after you stopped trying to explain them. Scholars ask anyway. One insists the myth was clearly about agricultural symbolism. Another claims the stolen cows are a metaphor for divine inheritance. A third thinks the entire story reflects the tension between oral and written traditions in archaic Greece. Hermes listens to all of this, grinning, eating grapes he didn't pay for, and occasionally offering helpful nonsense like, actually the cows were metaphors for clouds. They believe him. You can't help but admire it. Historians still argue whether myths like this one were meant to be literal or layered, but here in the grove, none of that matters. The cows are still here, chewing, sleeping, completely unbothered by interpretive frameworks. You play your lyre, the same tune you played when it all began, and it sounds miraculously like now. Scholars eventually settle in. They stop theorizing quite so loudly, start humming, start sketching cows instead of arguments, and you, for the first time in a long while, stop trying to be understood. You just play and let them wonder. It begins with a cart, a wobbly wooden thing pulled by a mule who looks like he gave up centuries ago. It creaks into the grove one morning, laden with jars, scrolls, dusty instruments, and an old man who sneezes every time the wind shifts, says he's from a city you've never heard of, that he came to see the Lyre, not you, not the grove. Not the myth. Lyre are curious, so you show him. It's aged a little, the turtle shell dulled by sun, the strings occasionally moody with humidity, but still, it sinks, gasps, not because of the music, but because of the object. Starts sketching, measuring, taking notes in margins already filled with what looks like soup-stained sand. Then just like that, he leaves. A few months later, so do others. They come, with wagons, with coins, with questions. They want the Lyre, not yours, but replicas, reproductions, a piece of the myth they can put on a shelf or in a corner of a dusty museum. You're not offended. It's just odd because the Lyre was never about the object, it was about the moment, the hush of a cowherd falling asleep to sound the chaos of Hermes, lying through a lullaby, the sunlight on strings stretched by accidental. You give them what they ask for, you teach them how to tune, how to carve, how to soften the sound with wax, and whether they leave with instruments. You stay with silence. Seen slowly, the Lyre becomes a symbol, not of peace, not even of sleep, but of story. They hang it in temples, in schools, on the backs of coins. No one spends. They tell the myth, often wrong, but always with a smile. Historians still argue over the oldest surviving example. Some say it's the cracked one, found in a merchant's house. Others insist it's the dusty fragment in the corner of the Delphi Archive. Don't care, because your Lyre is still here, still tuned, still warm from the sun, and your hand cows still nap to it. Hermes still borrows it when he feels dramatic, and you, Apollo, still plan it to impress, not to instruct, but to remember and to remind the world that even gods need hobbies. It ends where it began, it with thunder or prophecy, or a golden chariot streaking across the sky, but with cows and music and the kind of quiet that only settles when no one's trying to be important. You're sitting in the grove, same spot, same tree. The Lyre on your lap feels like an extension of your breath now. Not an invention, not a symbol, just something that belongs in your hand. Sherms is somewhere behind you, convincing a goat to wear a laurel crown. Again, cows are grazing, slow, peaceful, moving like they've never known anything but this rhythm. And you're not thinking about Olympus, about altars, about what mortals are saying in their little cities, with their slightly wrong myths and their very right lullabies. Here, just playings of strings, bare fingers, a tune that drifts like a leaf and doesn't care where it lands. And in that moment you understand something, not in a big dramatic way, no lightning, no oracle voice echoing through time, just a gentle settling of thought that maybe the story wasn't about theft or music or divine egos at Almabe. It was about learning to be still, to sit with confusion, to herd something stubborn, to laugh when your little brother outwits you with sandals made of reeds. Historians still wonder what the moral was to write about justice, about invention, about divine hierarchy, and its collapse into pastoral nonsense. But you, Apollo, you just remember the first moo that made you laugh, the first note that soothed instead of stunned, the first time you realized that sometimes the best kind of power is the kind that puts people to sleep. You keep playing even when the sun lowers itself behind the hillside, when Hermes stops humming and leans back against the tree with his hat tipped over his iciven, when the cows are nothing but soft shapes in the tall grass. You play, and the grove listens, and the world for a few more moments forgets everything else. Now the grove fades gently from view. The music slows, each note like a ripple on still water, spreading softly, then vanishing without a trace. The cows are lying down now, breathing slow, deep. Content therms is quiet, even the wind has decided to hush itself. And you're still sitting there under that ancient olive tree, your fingers brushing the strings without urgency, letting the final melody stretch and wander. And for there's nothing left to solve, no more herds to wrangle, no myths to explain. Only the warmth of twilight, the scent of earth and sweet hay, and the distant hum of sleep. This is how myths end, not with a battle, not with a lesson, but with a yawn, a breath, a lull. So let go of the questions, let go of the plot, of whether it all made sense. Sight doesn't need toy, we're here, you're safe, and the music is still playing somewhere out there. A lyre is strumming in time with your breath, so close your eyes, let your body sink. Let the sounds of the grove carry you and drift slowly into dreams.